With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
Has been fighting against censorship of free speech in the UK. He is Grammy Award-winning rock star and former banjoist with Mumford & Sons, Winston Marshall, and he joins us now. Winston, I would love to just pick up with a statement we heard in that clip. The man who was arrested said, "You guys have just opened up a world of S." He's suggesting that there will be public backlash to that arrest over something he posted online. I'm curious, has there been?
I'm sorry to say that this is now just absolutely normal, that we're being desensitized to how ridiculous it is. This is one of 30 arrests a day for social media posts, 11,000 a year. And I will also note that this was before Sir Keir Starmer brought in his Labour government last year. The key difference now under Labour is that not only is he specifically targeting people with ideologies opposed and different to his, in this case, this meme, Pete North posted a meme that was not only said F Hamas, it also said F Islam and F Palestine, and he was arrested. You'll hear the police officer saying that it was inciting racial hatred. Now, say what you want about that meme. There's nothing about race involved in it. But the other thing that Keir Starmer's done, which is particularly unnerving compared to the previous Conservative governments, is that he keeps lying. He keeps saying that Britain has a free speech, is proud of its free speech legacy. When he's had several meetings with President Trump, you'll have heard them. And he says, I'm very proud of the free speech we have in Britain. And Vice President Vance calls him out and about people being arrested for silent prayer. That's also happening here in Britain. And Keir Starmer, again, doubles down. He says, no, I'm very proud of the free speech we have here in this country. And just to paint a picture of just how dire things are now, it is absolutely normal for families to meet and discuss what to do if the police come knocking at the door. I had this conversation with my partner a year ago. And now about a month ago, my mum and dad messaged me saying, this is what we've got to do if the police come. This is normal now in Britain to have a protocol. Get the phone, start recording. All of this, it's a very, very dark place we have become.
30 arrests a day, as you just said, so much so that you're all having a conversation about the protocol over being arrested for something you can say. I can only imagine, Winston, something else that's become normal is people are shutting up. I mean, that instills fear and censorship and self-censorship where people just stop saying things for fear of being arrested. 11,000, to your point, have been arrested.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It does shut people up. For every one person arrested, 100 people will have their mouths shut because they don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to lose whatever it might be that is at stake if they get arrested and all the trouble that comes along with that. I will say that there's a fight back and that people are taking the streets. There's more protests now up against it. Starmer is also even losing support from those on his left flank because they have started to get annoyed about how, if you can believe it or not, even his left flank are worried about how totalitarian his behavior has been.
I actually can believe it because that is shocking footage that we are seeing with some frequency of basis there coming out of the UK. Yesterday, we played the sentencing hearing for a guy going to jail for 2 years for something he posted on Facebook. And it's a sad state. It's a sad state for the UK.
The arrest in Britain of a TV comedy writer over posts he made on social media about transgender people has sparked an intense debate about freedom of speech, its limitations, and the extent to which material that's posted online has implications in the real world. The case concerns Graham Linehan, the well-known writer of sitcoms including Father Ted and The IT Crowd. Police did not identify Linehan by name, but confirmed they had arrested a man in his 50s at Heathrow Airport on suspicion of inciting hatred through social media posts.
We do have dedicated police officers. Their job is to look for this material.
Think before you post. Those were the words screamed out by government social media accounts threatening to lock up people for hate speech as riots swept the United Kingdom in the summer of 2024.
Keir Starmer said today laws governing social media will be reviewed.
To those who hadn't been paying attention, it offered a stark insight into a supposedly liberal, democratic nation that has come to police speech as much as, sometimes even more so, than actual violence.
I knew then they're trying to stitch us up. Oh, government, they don't like any kind of dissenting voices.
We do have a special relationship with our friends in the UK, but we also know that there have been infringements on free speech. That is something that we'll talk about today at lunch.
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom. We're very, very proud of it. We will protect it forever.
Inciting racial hatred, inciting religious hatred, grossly offensive online communications. Over recent decades, Britain has written one new speech crime after another into its statute books.
Let's talk about jury trials. Quentin Hunt is a criminal defence barrister and joins us now. Good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
I have to say, I was absolutely flabbergasted last week when we first found out that the Justice Secretary David Lammy was looking at basically abolishing jury trials for most crimes, unless it was the most serious murder, manslaughter, rape and the like. And so the vast majority of criminal prosecutions would be happening with just a single judge appointed to decide rather than a jury of our peers. Something that wasn't in the Labour manifesto, something that, as far as I can tell, no one thinks will actually do what he says it will, which is to speed up the justice system, and yet he wants to go ahead with it. What is the reasoning, as far as you can gather, behind this?
Well, as far as I can see, it can only be money.
You see the consequences, particularly in places that don't have free speech,
yes.
Right? Like England, we've
where they lock people up for memes and stuff. Literally, yeah.
12,000 people this year.
12,000?
12,000. 12,000 arrests for social media posts.
I mean, yeah, some of these things you read about it, and it's like literally, it's someone had a meme on their phone that they didn't even send to anyone,
right?
And they're like in prison for that.
Yeah.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
And welcome to The World Today and the Protagonist, and our topic today with our panel, Citizen Lockout, UK Policing and Justice. Now, on December 2, Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy outlined the government's proposed reforms for triable either way offences like theft, fraud or affray, where sentences would likely be 3 years or less in England and Wales. A judge alone would decide guilt, bypassing juries to tackle the 78,000 case backlog in England and Wales Crown courts. Critics call it an erosion of Magna Carta rights, while the government insists speed serves victims without affecting serious crimes such as murder or rape. Is this correct? Incredible. Has the government gone too far, scrapping a fundamental legal right? You wonder. I think it has. We'll find out soon from our panel. If any of us were wrongly accused of sexual assault at Christmas parties, would we rather be trialled by a single judge or a jury of people from a variety of backgrounds? Will this fix the case backlog? Most likely not. And how the hell do we get to this point? Perhaps this is a sign of the times when there are more ordinary, law-abiding citizens accused of crimes investigated under the Terrorism Act or arrested unlawfully. In 2023-24, the UK arrested 35,000 people for online posts, more than China, Russia and Belarus combined. There's no doubt that policing and justice and its administration are under serious pressure in the UK. How much of it is due to government incompetence and poor policy and administration? Just look at the asylum and border policies and how they've been mishandled exposing communities to unnecessary hardship and risk. So let's talk to our panel and find out if the UK policing and justice system is working. I think not, but we'll find out. Our guest today, Trevor Coult, will be here soon, we hope. Sam Smith is a UK blogger, and Robin Tilbrook, a solicitor, chairman of the English Democrats, and a big gun behind him. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. We have anyone? Thank you for joining me. Hello, anybody there?
Good morning, Mike.
Good morning. And Sam, good morning.
Good morning.
You're looking sprightly today at 7 o'clock in the morning. It's good to get up early. All right, just enjoy the moment. First of all, just for an overview, Robin, how serious is the problem at the moment that we're facing in the UK, and has law and order just disappeared?
I think it's very serious, and you were right to mention about the proposal to abolish jury trials. The point about that, contrary to what the barrister who was speaking to Julia Hartley-Brewer was saying, that it is partly about money, but it is also interesting that the way it's been reframed, he started off by saying he was going to abolish all jury trials, so there was a huge row about that, and then in fact when he's announced his proposal, it's less, and this is a common gambit for ministers these days. They try and frighten everybody, and then they don't go quite as far as what they've frightened us about, and this is what he did. He's previously been saying that jury trials are absolutely a central part of maintaining liberty, and he's right. It was the jury system which maintained liberty in England over the centuries. It wasn't the judges. And of course, the real problem here is he's saying that if you're likely to receive a sentence of less than 3 years, and that would be the case with most free speech matters, then you won't get a jury trial. And the reason, of course, that they don't like jury trials for free speech matters is because the juries often acquit people who are accused of that, whereas judges won't. The judges are selected on the basis that they are signed up to the Multiculturalist Project. The Judicial Appointments Commission says they won't even consider a judge's appointment unless you can demonstrate a lifetime's commitment to equality and diversity. So they are fully signed up to the project, and they will convict people who are saying things that are against the Multiculturalist Project. Simple as that. So they are on the side of Starmer and the government.
Sam, what do you think?
So, I completely agree that Keir Starmer is a disaster, and the real reason that they want to reduce jury trials is to save money, because they've got into a situation where we have this enormous backlog in the criminal justice system due to this huge slew of cases of wrongly prioritized crimes like speech. If you've got to arrest 12,000 people for posting memes, that's going to put strain on the court system. And as a consequence of that, there's a huge backlog in England and Wales. And so if you've been raped or a family member's been murdered, you're going to potentially have to wait years for justice. And to try to clear this backlog, they are trying to reduce the scope of jury trials. I have mixed feelings about judges. It is true that some judges do have very strong views. Having said that, I'm aware, particularly locally, that judges have overturned some convictions of people for exercising their free speech rights. For example, where I live, Hertfordshire Police have had. There was an embarrassing appeal a couple of years ago now, in which a woman had been having an argument online with a transgender activist, and her conviction was torn apart by the appellate judge and overturned. And although it took us some years, and obviously was very depressing for her, and in some ways the process was the punishment, but certainly Starmer's motive is to save money, and it arises in part from the very poor prioritisation decisions that the government and parts of our criminal justice system have made.
I just want to ask you, Sam, before we get into this, tell us about your recent experience in being wrongly arrested and your home searched by the Hertfordshire Police, who seized all your electronic devices, and you went through a very, very unpleasant time. Tell us what's transpired up until now.
So, as we discussed, back on the 8th of March 2005, there was a knock at the door at 1:45 exactly, and the police were there, and I was very nice and polite to them, as you always are, to any public servant, and they said they were going to place me under arrest for 2 blog articles, and it was for false communications. And they did indeed seize all my electronic devices and search my house and seize some Conservative Party leaflets they found left over from an election some years ago. And they gave it all back the next week when I successfully demonstrated the search was illegal because I'm legally qualified, so I sent them a letter of claim. And what they'd done is they'd arrested me for false communications and they had messed it up dreadfully. So that even their very unhelpful internal investigation found it was unlawful. And the local police commissioner then upheld the decision it was unlawful, but overturned the rest of the police internal investigation, saying that they hadn't investigated it properly and hadn't questioned the police officers. So to go through the mistakes we've uncovered, they said they're arresting me for false communications, and false communications at the moment is a summary only offence, what the Americans will call a misdemeanor, under Section 179 of the Online Safety Act 2023. But it replaced 2 older crimes. There was an offence of false communications under the Malicious Communications Act, and a offence of false communications under the Communications Act. And they were both indictable offences, but they were abolished in 2023 and replaced by this misdemeanor offence. So the first problem they had was that their search was a warrantless search, and it was illegal because you can only do it for indictable for serious felonies, whereas the new offence is summary only. Second off, they didn't realise it had been appealed and wrote in the custody record that I was arrested for malicious communications, but the body cam very clearly shows they said false communications, and the false communications offence under the Malicious Communications Act has been repealed 2 years before my arrest. So then they, having arrested me for these Conservative Party leaflets, which they found during the search, they put on the custody record, it was necessary under our legal test for necessity to arrest me to exercise search powers that would arise. The problem is they'd already done the search. So they couldn't logically then, they didn't do another search, they couldn't logically say they needed to arrest me to exercise the search powers they just exercised. So then, of course, this is their internal investigation, and the internal investigations team is desperate to save face, so they just ignored bits of my complaint they didn't like. Like I said, the false communications weren't even in my articles. And then they grudgingly agreed it was an unlawful arrest. Not least because the detective sergeant who had to deal with this the morning after my arrest had written in the log, and this arrest was unsuitable and unlawful. And then, because the detectives were not impressed, I'm not going to name them because they've done nothing wrong, the detectives were not impressed by this arrest, which they had to deal with. And then after that, obviously, police complaints procedure, appeal, which laughed at the police complaints procedure and said they hadn't even questioned the officers. Then, as I said, there's a letter of claim. I have eventually, 8 months after they kept asking for extensions on my letter of claim, eventually I've issued a claim form in the King's Bench for £70,000. And at the moment, I am trying to deal with some preliminary issues because both the investigation bodies found the arrest and search unlawful. I've asked for interim damages. So I'm bringing a personal injury claim. So it's quite substantial. And at the moment, I'm trying to get a court hearing listed, which is quite difficult towards the end of the year. But we're doing what we can. I mean, they've been quite helpful at the court. They say they can get me an hour, but really I need probably 2.5 hours to 4 hours for the interim hearing. So that's where we are. Lawsuit is live, and we are waiting on a hearing date. And the police have not yet filed a defence, and they have not responded to the letter of claim. And particular's been served, so they've got about 2 weeks to at least acknowledge. And I expect lots of very silly procedural arguments rather than any attempt to address the substance of the complaints, and I'm waiting to see what happens. I'm very grateful to a UK barrister called David Hurst of 5RP Chambers, who's checked my work for sanity pro bono. I should say there's another barrister called Matthew Hodson who helped. There's a very good solicitor called Ian Gould, who's one of our best suing the police solicitors in the country, who has had a very nice long conversation with me, and they've all kind of sanity checked what I'm doing. So it should be okay. And it's really a case of chasing the court. And that is where we are.
Well, it's very interesting. Robin, you're a solicitor and you've got a gun. How do you, what's your impressions of this? Minus the gun, of course.
Certainly right. Sam was unlawfully arrested, and the search also seems to have been improper as well. But I think the thing is that it demonstrates, doesn't it, all the complexity of what he was saying. It demonstrates that there is a degree of incompetence, a huge degree of incompetence, in fact, in the British state. And one of the areas of incompetence isn't just the police officers, but it's also the question of the fact that there's sort of legislative verbal diarrhea. What they do is they are creating new law at the rate of more than 20,000 pages a year, to the point where nobody can keep up with what's going on in terms of new law. And the idea that the law makes any overall sense has long since been lost. We're now at a point where it quite clearly doesn't, and even lawyers can no longer keep up with changes to the law. However, I do think that as far as juries are concerned, going back to that, we need to look at this in terms of a sort of historical development rather than just a single one-off incident. Because the state has been trying to get rid of juries out of all sorts of areas. Before the war, most civil cases were being dealt with, or a lot of civil cases were being dealt with by juries. We had a legacy of the civil cases being dealt with by juries where it was a police matter, and also where it was defamation, right up until quite recently. That's largely gone now. We've got more and more attempts to try and limit jury trials for all sorts of criminal offences. This is the latest in the line of trying to limit juries. And the reason for that is that the establishment don't like juries. Juries are an uncontrollable and unmanageable influence on outcomes of criminal trials. And they are the element in the criminal justice system, where ordinary people get to say whether or not what the establishment are trying to do with law is actually going to result in conviction. So they are an important check on the growing authoritarianism of the British state, and they don't like it.
In 1992, Starmer said this: the right to trial by jury is an important factor in delicate balance between the power of the state and the power of the individual. And that was Keir Starmer in 1992. Sam, what the hell happened since then?
Well, a lot of people changed their views. Full disclosure, back in I was about 13 in 1992, but I was 18 in 1997, and I was in Labour, and a lot of people changed. I became conservative, but Keir Starmer and the Labour government have a legacy of authoritarianism. Back in the days of Tony Blair's government, they would make laws, discover they'd been badly drafted, and before they made the commencement order to start those laws, which they often sort of built into the law, they would repeal it because they realised they made a mistake. And they have continued this trend all the way into Keir Starmer's government. One of the sad legacies of the previous Labour government, which I will mention, is this thing called sentences which are indeterminate for public protection, which was a Labour disaster. And what they did was it was basically a bit like 3 strikes and you're out for certain offences. So what would happen is you'd have someone, steal a biscuit or something, and then their third offence might involve an element of violence, and they would get life. And and the sentence was called indeterminate, so it wasn't really life. They had to prove that they had sort of reformed and addressed their mental health problems or whatever. And the problem is the government didn't then make that service available in the prisons. So there wasn't a course or treatment or whatever. And the problem with that is you meant really, really tiny offenders would go to prison indefinitely. And then they couldn't be let out. So all the prisons got clogged up. And a lot of, individuals who may have committed crimes, but, did deserve life in prison. They would stay there, and it was repealed as one of Labour's many law enforcement disasters. But even now, there are thousands of people still in prison. They've reduced it a bit for these indeterminate public protection sentences, and they've been resisting resentencing. And quite often, they were relatively minor offences. We're not talking about murderers or rapists here. So, looking at the establishment, there's a degree of incompetence and there's a degree of failure to understand their own mistakes and abandonment of high principle words as soon as they get into power. And my impression, to answer your question very specifically, of Keir Starmer and what's changed, is that he never had any real principles. I've got no respect for him. The whole culture of the Labour Party and Labour students back at that time was largely amoral and concerned with realpolitik. And the effect of that is that the growing generation of Labour students who became today's ministers spent most of their time in student politics, messing around and rigging elections in the National Union of Students rather than doing anything constructive. And now they are taking those dystopian tactics that they used in student politics and applying them to the country. And that is what we're seeing.
Robin, would you like to add to that? I mean, on our chat, Mogden says, none of this is incompetence. It is all very deliberate. And if I recall on the clip we played at the start, and I think it was Quinton Hunt, and he said the reason for this is, part of it is money. And secondly, don't forget, we had this huge backlog because of COVID. Will this reduce the backlog, do you think?
Probably not particularly. The point is that the trials take a certain amount of time because the evidence has to be presented, and it's not necessarily going to reduce the backlog. The only thing that might help in terms of backlog really is to do what they should have done in the first place, which is properly fund the system. It's not. It's the backlog is a result of deliberate policies by the British establishment, not just Labour but also the so-called Conservatives. That they have failed to administer the justice system effectively. They've created far too many new offences. There's a terrific confusion about what they've created and ongoing reforms of offences, such as Sam was expressing with what happened to him. The police don't even know what the law is that they're trying to enforce anymore in many cases, and we've got a situation where there's confusion. There's been lack of money. There's been lack of investment. They've been closing courts rather than opening them, despite the increased number of offences. They haven't appointed enough judges, and the result is that they are not able to tackle the backlog. And so what we've got is the classic statement of the tyrant throughout the ages, which is necessity is the problem, and so they're claiming that we've got to get rid of jury trial in order to make up for their own incompetence.
It's I mean, maybe they could go back to the olden days. Off with their heads, just get rid of them all fixed in no time.
Don't suggest it, Mike. They might well come up with that.
Yeah. Well, David Lammy could very well do that. I mean,
although I think this particular lot would probably prefer a gulag than a public execution.
Yeah. I have to say, to answer the point from the people in chat, They can be evil and incompetent, yeah? My experience, because I know some of these people from Labour students, it's like a failing apprentice team, that's about to get called into the boardroom and sort of cross with Dick Dastardly and Muttley levels of competence. So, they can be both. They can be evil and incompetent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be careful because if I ever come back to the UK, which I hope to in the not too distant future, I would hate to have a hello, and come with us, Mr. Ryan. We'd like to have a chat about your show that you had Robin and Sam on, and we want to talk to you about that immediately. But you know what I could do for publicity, I could get you, Sam, to look after me, and Robin, you could defend me. Maybe not. Look, at least 30 men and women and children are arrested for speech-related crimes a day in the UK. That's astronomical. I would imagine it's more. Sam, what do we do? I mean, how do we get back to some sort of sensibility?
So we already have laws about this, which I've obviously taken advantage of, which but police often ignore. And they ignore because they get away with it. We have this thing called the necessity test. You're not really supposed to arrest people if a voluntary interview would do. And they flout it. I mean, in my case, that they've specifically found it was unnecessary. But, in a lot of cases, you've got police turning up at court to midnight over a tweet. It's not a bomb threat, it's a tweet with some politically problematic statement. There's no urgency to it. They could be dealing with a robbery and, saving police time by just inviting the person in for an interview. And the reason it's not enforced is because police departments, the police constable for the area, controls the internal investigations department. So most people's experience of complaining about police is reasonable complaints are often refused or kind of they try and water them down the findings. In my case, for example, they did very grudgingly find the arrest unlawful, but then the rest of that investigation was overturned on appeal because they hadn't even questioned the police and they'd ignored certain bits of it, like the fact that my alleged statements weren't there. So what we could do to improve things is separate the local police misconduct investigations from the police force, put them under someone else who's not the same chief constable, because otherwise they're investigating themselves. And funnily enough, find themselves, pardon me, innocent most of the time.
Yeah, I find it interesting. You look at George Galloway, Robin, for he was, I think they said to him, they said, they said, we want to go and have a chat to you. He said, and they said, if you don't have to, but if you don't, we're going to charge you with terrorism crimes. That is incredible. George Galloway now is, I presume he's in Dubai or somewhere. I get that impression. He really can't go back to the UK. And he said if he had been found guilty or had declined the invitation to have a few words to the constabulary, he would have been charged with a terrorist crime and he would never have been able to travel again. It's hurt his health, affected his wife, which it does, and it would normally. Do you think, looking at George Galloway, who's been in the public eye for a long, long time, both as a politician and in the media, do you think for an ordinary person that's just having sending out the odd tweet or post or whatever, to have the police roll up and drag you down to the police station, it really does shake the metal, doesn't it?
Yes, and of course it is an intimidation tactic. That's what it's all about. But George Galloway's case is, I think, an interesting one because I think the situation was that he'd been to Russia, and so he's being accused of a terrorism offence, or they're talking about terrorism offences simply because the guy's been to Russia. And I do feel that is an example of what happened during the whole COVID emergency, so-called, where we wound up with the sort of mask of liberal democracy being stripped off the entire state. We suddenly realised that actually all parts of the establishment work together, and the things that we'd been told, like we got our human rights and things like that, none of that apparently had any real existence at all. And we actually had judges ruling on that, saying that the human rights were subject to necessity and emergency, and so consequently they no longer applied in that situation. So we are in a state here in England where the British state is clearly no longer a liberal democracy. And I think it is an authoritarian state. It is, however, an authoritarian state where quite a lot of what it does is restricted by sheer incompetence, and that's partly the sort of things that Sam was talking about with the people within the political parties, but it's also the administrative state. They've been appointing people on the basis of tick boxing multiculturalist targets rather than on the basis of being any good at the job, and so consequently they're not good at the job, and that's been going on now for so long that wherever you turn within the British state, what people say is nothing bloody well works anymore.
It doesn't. Even the hello blokes, they don't work anyway, unless you have a McDonald's nearby. Now, I was just thinking, Sam, how did you feel when they hello at 11:45 at night? I mean, of course, they've considered that it's very late and this may put you out, or had they considered that you were probably just going to bed or were asleep and you were not you're woken up. So how did you feel? Did you feel intimidated? And how do you think the average person would feel?
Well, I think the average person would be terrified. I was kind of like, what the actual, because I have a little bit of knowledge of the law, although I was, in no position to look up the details till the next day when we'd done the interview and I'd be released. But I was like, what? So, and also I'd been in bed, so I was quite chill. But most people would be terrified. And I'd like to give you an example of another couple of Hertfordshire cases, Mike, which I think you'll find entertaining, to illustrate the way the police behave, because of course I'm sure everyone who's watching will be aware of the couple in the same police force area in Hertfordshire who are in Borehamwood who were arrested for complaining about their children's school, and it was very polite, and of course the same police force has now paid them 10 grand each, which is, I think, is a bit light, but they have made a significant payment. But it depends often who you are, because there's another case. Here, police disciplinaries are published, and there's a case in Hertfordshire of a police sergeant called Sergeant Steve Evans, who was disciplined but not sacked by Hertfordshire Police for something he shared online. And what he shared was in a police WhatsApp group, and they were talking about things, and he decided what he'd like to share is a video of popular children's character Peppa Pig, which then morphed into a real man sodomizing a pig. And he didn't get fired. And police said, well, if that was a member of the public, this is the Chief Constable's ruling, the previous Chief Constable's ruling, that was a member of the public, well, we give them a stern talking to. We wouldn't prosecute them just for having one illegal, because bear in mind, obviously, real bestiality images are illegal. No, we wouldn't prosecute them. We'd give them a stern talking to. And this is a guy called Sergeant Steve Evans, and he was back on duty. I mean, I checked this. This was widely reported in the news, and I just thought it was hilarious that they treated him so leniently. And then I was thinking, blimey, he's going to get some stick when he's back on the job, isn't he? It's going to permanently change his call sign to Oink or something.
The pig did.
That's a real case. It was reported at the time.
One would have to ask though, what sort of lipstick was involved? I mean, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Sorry. If you watch Deliverance, you'll understand what I mean. But it's just a terrible thing. And I'm thinking about Robin. I mean, this is one of the great. Truly, there are some things in my warped mind that I cannot get rid of, and that's a new one, by the way. And it hasn't even written back to him since. It's terrible. Anyway, I'm just thinking though the case of that guy that was charged with did something, and he threw a rasher of bacon at the mosque. I mean, again, it's and he was charged for it. I mean, do you think the anti-terrorism laws? I mean, there are those terrible people called placard holders, and they're also charged with a terrorist act. I mean, do we need to just revisit, you think, common sense, or do we need? I mean, you got Starmer and Lammy there till the cows come home, and then you got Nigel, the game show host in waiting. And I don't know if he'll get in, but I don't know what's going to happen. But at the moment, we have this great imposition on human rights and privileges, don't we?
And we do. So, I mean, it's worth remembering that the Labour government got elected on the votes of less than 20% of the electorate. And the Electoral Commission tells us that about 25% of those who qualify to be on the electoral roll don't go on it. So they've got really quite a small mandate. But of course, that the electoral system gives them a majority in the House of Commons. And that means that they're in government until the next general election, which will probably be in 2029. And there isn't really any functioning sort of constitutional mechanism to punish them in any way between now and then. So you're right, we have that imposition on us. There's very little that can be done about it constitutionally. I think there will be a rising tide of protests. We recently had a wave of people putting up Cross of St George flags across England in protest at, in particular, the vast number of illegal immigrants that we've now got housed in hotels across the country. We're getting to a point where not only does nothing work with the state, but the way that the state operates is really against the interests of ordinary English people. And I do think it's interesting that the examples of free speech arrests that we're talking about are free speech arrests of English people protesting about the way that Starmer's government is operating and the British establishment generally. Whereas what we also know is that on a sort of daily basis, almost within the mosques across the country, imams are giving sermons which are incitements to jihad. And they're not arrested, they're not challenged, there's nothing going on against them. The state wants to pretend that the big threat is patriotic people or as they would put it, the far right, whereas it's pretty obvious from the statistics of what terrorist activity actually occurs that the biggest threat is Islamism. And they're not doing enough about sorting that out. They're trying to deflect from it.
It's very interesting. I mean, I saw a meme that had Keir Starmer, and he says, because after his little tirade with Trump, and he said, "We're very proud of our free speech record." But anyway, the meme is something like, again, "We're very proud of our free speech record. Free speech does exist in the UK, and anybody who says otherwise will arrest you." And yeah. I thought that's a great little meme, but it's not far from the truth. And for example, I look at Ricky Gervais, who I've gotten to love considerably, and after his vodka posters were taken down from the underground, and the one of them said, "Welcome to London. Don't forget your stab vest." And I thought that's a very clever little point there. But he's not wrong with that, is he, Sam? And if you think about what's happening within the UK, and then you have all these rights and freedoms and the abuse of the law on those protesting about this, Britain is in a real mess, isn't it?
I mean, it looks like both parties, both major political parties, have lost the confidence of the public. And we are seeing that in polls that say, neither of them are going to be in next time. It's going to be a new party run by Nigel Farage. And obviously that could change before the election. And it would be a radical change. But what it shows is that Robin is essentially right. Public services aren't working on many levels, partly because of ideology, but partly because of ill-considered failure to control migration. And it doesn't matter which group is migrating, it just matters that we are a small island and it is putting pressure on services. And as a consequence of that, we have a lot of difficulties hitting us simultaneously, which are making the public very dissatisfied, and the establishment seeks to resolve that by cracking down on speech. And a consequence of that is that the establishment has become considerably more authoritarian. So, yeah.
I'm just wondering, as I hit the wrong button there, it's terrible because it's for the other person that hasn't turned up. I'm just thinking though, Hertfordshire Police, they've had a few. They've made the news a few times, and somebody has said that some areas of the UK they're a lot, what's the word, harder or nastier or apt to get you. How do we fix that up? I mean, Hertfordshire Police is just one example, but there are other areas. Is there a breakdown, a systematic breakdown within the police force, Robin? And how do we fix it? I mean, or are they just as confused as the public, and therefore let's go out and arrest someone for something because if we don't, we're in trouble?
I can't really speak from personal experience about the Hertfordshire Police, but I did stand for the Essex Police Commissioner elections in the last election and had stood before. So I do know a bit about how Essex Police operate. And so the police, the idea of directly elected police commissioners was potentially a good one, in as much as the police commissioner was supposed to control policy for his police force and budgets, and could also enforce his control by sacking the chief constable and appointing somebody that was more in line with the way that the police commissioner wanted that police force to operate. So in principle, it would have been possible to do something about some of these problems. But in fact, of course, what's tended to happen is there's no help for standing in the election. In the case of Essex, you've got more than 1 million voters, and that's very difficult to get the message out to 1 million people. And you need a large budget to do it. So what's happened in Essex is that the Conservative Party has won the elections, and they have not acted as you would expect a Conservative Party to act. They have promoted chief constables whose focus is on multiculturalism and diversity. The one that we've got in Essex, Ben Julian Harrington, he's a keen activist for gay pride, and consequently we get Essex Police focusing on that. When we were being given our sort of talk by the chief constable before the election, he was saying he gave us a talk in which he didn't say anything at all about doing anything for sorting out crime in this country or in the county. His talk was entirely about sorting out diversity quotas and appointing people on diversity lines. And we haven't got a focus amongst the senior police. I think probably, and I think that's probably typical across the country. We haven't got a focus amongst senior police on doing the basic job. They are very much political activists, I think, and that's serious part of the problem.
Sam, you're a man about London, tripping the light, fantastic, night in, day out, whatever it is. I mean, you can see those flares. I've seen them of yours at the clubs. But I'm just thinking, how do we fix? Because when you're out and about, and you see what's happening in London. How do we fix the police? Because if the public haven't got trust in the in your constabulary, in the police force, then we are watching very quickly before us the total destruction or disassembling of the West.
Yes, I mean, there will be reform, because if the current parties don't do it, someone else will be elected to do it. And I say that, as a Conservative supporter. And what is proposed at present is that a number of our free speech flaws will be simply abolished. That is, for example, Farage's party, and I give that only as an example of the current most popular, as it were, alternative, say they're just going to abolish loads of these laws, which they can. It's Parliament. It's not It's not like the United States. It's a parliamentary democracy. The incoming government can, if it wish, abolish the Human Rights Act and abolish all of our free speech laws that in any way make it possible to arrest you over speech criticising all sorts of things. And I think a difficulty is that because the last two governments haven't found a good balance, the incoming new government, whoever we get, may well decide to err on the side of freedom, and we may get suddenly a much more liberal environment, perhaps even too liberal. But things are going to change radically because the public aren't happy, and they're making it very clear at the ballot box.
Mayor Thomas, Legal and Policy Officer at Big Brother Watch, which is a civil liberties group, said the number of arrests is extremely concerning in a liberal democracy in the UK. Robin, she's bang on, but at the moment I haven't seen anybody, I haven't seen much happening in the news how to fix it. In fact, many times we see that legacy media, BBC and the others, rarely acknowledge the problem.
Yeah, you're right. They don't acknowledge the problem, and most of the response is either to clamp down in the way that happened with Sam on exercise of free speech, and to try and get rid of it that way, or they are trying to deflect from it and attract our attention to something else. Coming back to what we were saying earlier, of course, this whole business about jury trials. That's another clamping down. But we were talking earlier about Starmer and his reliability. But I do think we've had an absolutely staggering example of just how dishonest the government is in the run up to the budget, which is, after all, one of our most significant events in the parliamentary year, the budget. What we now know is that the Office of Budget Responsibility, which is a quango that's been created to try and deflect criticism from the Chancellors of the Exchequer, they told the government that there wasn't a need for large tax rises, but the government wanted to implement large tax rises, so they simply lied and claimed that there was a huge black hole that had to be filled by large tax rises. And the thing that didn't work for them was that the chairman of the Office of Budget Responsibility leaked the memos that both Starmer and Rachel Reeves had got, so they've been exposed as liars, and Starmer signed off on this. So there have been a long series of incidents which show that Starmer is completely unreliable, and that if he assures you one thing, you need to, like if he tells you it's raining outside, I think you need to go and check rather than assume that what you were being told was correct. I thought one of the most appalling examples in his history was his making out when Corbyn was the leader of Labour. He made out that Corbyn was a great personal friend. And the moment that he'd replaced Corbyn, lying that he was going to be carry on the Corbyn legacy and be the new Corbyn, the moment that happened, the moment he replaced Corbyn, Corbyn's no longer a friend. He's never been a friend, he said. Somebody like that you just can't trust, can you, about anything?
No, I think it's terrible. I think it's a favourite pastime of people not to trust government, but this is just ridiculous. The other thing are the police. And we talked about before the backlog. I find that, actually, looking at these latest figures, I find that a little bit unusual, because to have a backlog, you have to have people charged because they've been caught doing a crime. Latest figures show that 90% of all crime went unsolved in 2023, up from 75% in 2015. So I'm just wondering, are these people, the backlog, has that gone back a decade? Because if they haven't solved 90% of crime, then you only have 10%, and that would say that the backlog, if you have a backlog, what would happen if they started doing their job, the police, Sam?
Well, if they started to actually prioritise crimes that worry people, like robbery and murders and burglaries and rapes and sexual assaults, then maybe we wouldn't have such a big backlog, and we wouldn't have to take radical steps of abolishing jury trials in order to clear that backlog.
Robin, you deal with the law, and you've known a few good coppers, I would imagine, but they're far and few between. If there's 90% of crime unsolved, can I ask you, why have you got a police force except to arrest placard holders and people sending hurty notes?
Yeah, so the police used to be said to be citizens in uniform, and the police used to be focused on maintaining law and order. This is what was said to be the case, and that was the product of the reforms in the 19th century under Peel. We had a police force that was basically working, mostly lived with local communities, patrolled on foot, talked to people, and were quite in tune with what ordinary people wanted. What's happened since the 70s is that they've switched from law and order, and they now talk about law enforcement, by which they mean getting convictions. So a good example of the kind of change that's occurred is if you had suffered a burglary and you caught the burglar, and you probably thumped him a couple of times to keep him quiet whilst the police arrived. What tended to happen in the old days was that the police were very grateful. You probably got a commendation from the magistrate's bench for arresting the burglar. Nowadays, the police are looking to see if they can arrest somebody. And the burglar, of course, denies everything and doesn't give a statement, whereas the homeowner thinks that the police have arrived to help him. And so he sort of burbles away and tells them that he hit the guy a couple of times once he'd got him on the ground. And at that point, he's the one that's going to get arrested for assault. And the police are going to be looking at trying to get a conviction, because they've got to get a few convictions, otherwise their record's going to be looking absolutely terrible. And so they're no longer trying to maintain order. They've got some targets that they're interested in, and part of the reason why they like social media things is because those targets are relatively easy to fulfill. You've got the evidence there in the social media, and you've also got somebody who's unlikely to fight them when they turn up, because they don't like getting involved in fights. Whereas, of course, the old police tended to be ex-soldiers, and they were perfectly happy to get involved in a fight. In fact, they probably part of the job satisfaction as far as they were concerned. Now they are not selected for being the type of people that want to be in a fight, and consequently they don't want to be in fights. So they'd much rather arrest somebody who's going to argue with them nicely, as Sam did, rather than try and fight them.
I'm just thinking though, first of all, if they haven't arrested that many people, they would forget their script. It's the hello, hello, hello. They would forget that part of the arrest. I presume that's part of the whole process. But and you're right about the person that protects his home. But I have a question for you, Robin. If they want to charge that person for assault on the criminal who's just tried to break into the house or has broken into the house, does it mean that we have law-abiding criminals that would say, look, I'm going to tell you, I was trying to break into his house. However, he attacked me. So what would happen to that person? So, I mean, I don't understand your law at the moment. I don't understand the police, and I am the son of a policeman. And generally, police, they know, and you met them, they sort of know, who's good, who's bad. This would be quite distorted now, wouldn't it? It's just, and it doesn't make any sense, because if your constabulary, the police force, is as useless as we would say here, tits on a bull. There you are. That's a good farmer one. I mean, what's the purpose of having the police? Do we do what Mandani wants, and we'll have social workers going out? I mean, the whole thing is just, it's not workable, is it?
Well, I think what's happened here is that the police have become more and more sort of state enforcement agents, rather than being a traditional type of police force, traditional for England and Australia. They are disconnected from the public. I wouldn't necessarily think that was true of all ordinary officers, but it's certainly true of the higher ranks. Although there was a case which I think shows something quite interesting about the police quite recently. So up in Cheshire, Cheshire Police Force were recruiting 12 new constables. So they had a selection process, and one of the applicants was a man called Furlong, and he was also the son of a police officer. He's a white English heterosexual male, and I think Christian from the reports. So he scored highest in all the tests that they did for all the candidates, and yet he wasn't offered the job. The 12 that were offered the job all tick-boxed various sort of multiculturalist targets, rather than being good at the job. And unusually, he did something that we ought to have more people doing, as Sam is doing. He wasn't prepared to lie down and take that, and he sued the Cheshire Police and took them to the Employment Tribunal, and the Employment Tribunal said it was a clear-cut case of discrimination against him. And I think that is happening quite a lot, that their selection process is skewed to tick-box multiculturalist targets, and the police are not unique in that. You're getting that right across the public sector.
Sam?
I hope that people will challenge what police do, and I hope that they will challenge these laws. And as a Conservative supporter, I hope that the Conservative Party will start to focus again on people's concerns about free speech and about law and order happening properly, so that it can function. Because at the moment, the mainstream parties haven't grasped that nettle, and unless they do, they're going to experience radical change from different quarters. But people should fight, and they'll find quite often, if they look into it even slightly, it's possible to challenge a lot of these free speech arrests, because they will almost certainly fail the necessity test. And a lot of people don't realise that. The guy who was arrested for two tweets at midnight, who's been doing the rounds recently, very similar to mine. If he's not, threatening to murder someone or blow up a building, and it's just a tweet that's alleged to be offensive, it's probably not reasonable to arrest, and a challenge may well succeed.
Yep, it is a pity, and I go back to the Ricky Gervais "Welcome to London, don't forget your stab vest." He's spot on, and to think that is spot on says that there's a great breakdown in security, law and order, and of course with your police force in London. Just as we wind this up, how do we fix all this, Sam?
Make police internal investigations independent of the local force, and change the law so it's hard to arrest people over speech offences.
Robin?
It would be a huge, wide-ranging project. It's not just the police; it's the entire system that needs fixing. And we've got nothing that's going to happen in that respect between now and 2029. Whether the reform government will in fact reform the state to the extent it's needed, I just don't know, and I'm sceptical. But I think probably if it doesn't, then we might well be left with Professor David Bett's prediction that we drift into civil war.
And you are, I always mention this, and I do this with great smile in my voice and face. You have two guns there, and the flag, and I would imagine a good bottle of whiskey hidden somewhere. So you're fine. Bring on the revolution, as they would say. But no, I'm just joking, of course.
Sadly, Mike, I don't think a flintlock would help me much.
No, you'd have to find a match, and with smoking bandits stone age, good luck with that one. Maybe you could make noises, bang. But anyway, I'm jesting a bit, and it's a very serious problem too. Gentlemen, Sam Smith, UK blogger, Man About Town, and Robin Tilbrook, solicitor, chairman of the English Democrats, and also Man About Town. Thank you very much. This has been The World Today, and this is The Protagonists.